everyone, Pastor George here with today's Bible study recap. And today in Bible study, we looked at a familiar passage, at least if you've been following along with us as we go through this week, because we are on the second day before the Passover. And I decided today to do something a little interesting, because if you were to look at our passage, which is Mark 14, 1 through 11, you're going to find something very similar that we did at the beginning, which is Jesus' anointing at Bethany. And even though I have answer for this, right, I think that it's important to look at places where the Bible seems to be contradictory or make mistakes and try to make sense of what's going on there. So, for instance, right, we started this with the anointing at Bethany, and now we have it happening again, right? Mark says, 2 days from now, or 2 days before the crucifixion, Jesus is anointed at Bethany. Well, the problem is that we've already seen him be anointed, and that was 6 days before. So we have a few options here, right? Either this happens twice in the same week, it happens once, or actually it happens 3 times in the whole ministry of Jesus, because Luke doesn't record the anointing happening during the week. The record of anointing that he talks about is done much earlier, back in the kind of the beginning, middle of his gospel. Now, we looked at the passage. Obviously, very similar themes pop up that we looked at last time, things like that. But the main thing I wanted to focus on is the differences between the gospels and what they're recording, right? So generally, we looked at a few different commentaries on this from different study Bibles and things like that, what they talked about. So we had the NRSV, we had the NIV, we had the ESV, and those are kind of across the spectrum a little bit. NIV kind of being in the middle, ESV kind of being a more conservative commentary, and then the NRSV being a more liberal, again, liberal being not politically, but within the strain of liberal Christianity, liberal thinking. And it was interesting to see kind of how that, because the liberal Christianity will just say that, well, there was mistakes made, right? Because there's not really this insistence on the text having to be true, right? That Jesus and his followers are kind of making well, this might even be a made-up story, stuff like that, right? So it's just more about what it's trying to communicate. And in the more moderate and conservative translations and their commentaries, something that is noted is trying to harmonize, right? Trying to make sense of why they would record this a certain way. Especially because we know that the gospel writers are aware of each other, right? So, for instance, we know that Luke is aware of Mark, and like, why would he not put this in his story and actually put it elsewhere? Well, there might be answers to that, right? Well, it might have happened twice, because in the Lucan narrative, they don't talk about the same stuff, so it might be 2 different occasions. It makes sense to me. And then there's the difference between John and Mark and Matthew, because Matthew and Mark both put it on the second day. The interesting thing, though, when they talk about what they're going to do, or how they bring this up, this is kind of how they talk about it. So in Mark, this is what it says. It says it opens up by giving us stuff about the Pharisees and the chief priests wanted to kill Jesus. God has loved all the unity Jesus brings, and that how much people hate him. And then it ends the section. Then it says, and while he was at Bethany, in the house of Simon the leper. So it's very possible that this is that Mark and Matthew placed this here, not in order to talk about chronological time, but rather to say, well, this is like, we have the chief priests. This is when the chief priests and the scribes determined that they were going to try and kill Jesus. And look what happened when Jesus was at Bethany just a few days before. That's generally how more conservative translations take it. I definitely think that there's a bias in all these, right? We all want like our narrative to be airtight and make sense. But I do think that makes sense just based on how the Gospels are written and what their purpose is, to not give us necessarily day by day biography as we would expect it, but rather to move events around in order to make theological points. So I think that it's interesting. It's just an interesting thing to talk about. And all of this is, of course, it doesn't matter if it was the second day or the sixth day, because it's all leading up to what's going to happen with Jesus at the cross. And all of the gospel writers want us to understand that. And they have reasons for putting it in the places where they do, right? John might give us the chronological order, but Matthew and Mark want to really hit home that symbolic meaning of why Jesus is doing this. So that's what we talked about today. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday. I'll see you tomorrow for a new thing. Peace out.